All things considered, I should absolutely hate this show. It uses plenty of the exact same harem show tropes that I despise. The everyman wishy-washy hero, a harem of women designed to address specific fetishes so that viewers can choose their favorite waifu, and fan service that swings from tolerably sexy to uncomfortable harassment, with several major double standards on when said harassment is funny and when it's not. And yet, I find myself enjoying this show. Quite a bit. I think it's legitimately good. Not amazing or fantastic by any stretch of the imagination, but an enjoyable show nonetheless. It has a rather interesting premise and gimmick. It actually manages to offer justification for a few of those annoying harem tropes I mentioned earlier, though the justification still doesn't make a few of them any less squicky. Most of the characters manage to have more than one dimension, and the comedy is actually pretty funny, or at least has more hits than misses. It's praise that I can't give to most other harem or reverse harem shows out there, specifically with how oversaturated they are in the anime landscape nowadays. 3 years prior, the government revealed the existence of a parallel world to our own that was populated with creatures of myth. Elves, centaurs, orcs, dragons, mermaids. Basically, if there's a mythological creature, it came from this other world. The government established friendly relations with this other world and even instituted an exchange program where monsters and humans who wish to experience each other's culture can sign up to live with a host family, sort of like how the foreign exchange student program works. Enter Kurusu Kimihito, our bland doormat of a main character who didn't sign up for the program and yet was still delivered a Lamia, named originally enough, Mia, by Miss Smith, an incredibly lazy and seemingly incompetent social worker who works for the exchange program. So now Kimihito is living with a giant snake woman who, after she sees him treating her like he would any normal girl, really wants to bone him. That's a bit of a problem considering that anyone engaging in monster-human relations of that nature are breaking the law, resulting in the human going to jail and the monster being deported back to their own home. This is only further complicated when, of course, more monster women of various species end up finding their way into Kimihito's home, with the final tally by the end of the series being 7. Mia the Lamia, Pappy the Harpy, Centauria the Centaur, Sue the Slime, Mero the Mermaid, Rachni the Arachne, and Lala the Dullahan. Yes, rather a convenient naming scheme, but it makes it easy to remember their names at least. The series is primarily focused on the slice-of-life aspects of the group's home life, dealing with the various needs and quirks of living with someone who isn't human. And this is where the series really starts to impress me. Unlike other shows like Rosario plus Vampire, where all of the non-human characters are basically just humans with special powers, weaknesses, and transformations to monstrous forms, it's a very big plot point in Monster Musume that these girls are not human, and more often than not don't have human proportions. The series goes out of its way to stay as true to life to the anatomy of these girls as it can. For example, Mia is a Lamia. She is part snake, cold-blooded. If she gets too cold, she shuts down and enters a hibernative state, and can even die if she's kept in the cold too long. Rachni is a spider woman, so she gets drunk off of caffeine. Mero, being part fish, can easily be poisoned if she spends time in a chlorinated pool. Pappy's body is small, light, and childlike specifically because it allows her to be able to fly easily despite her being as old as the other women in the house. Though, let's be honest, that last one is mostly there specifically so they could have an excuse to add a lolly character to the cast. That fact aside, it is a level of detail I didn't expect when I first heard about the series, and I was pleasantly surprised. It's the sort of thing that a lot of harem shows wouldn't bother with, and would only focus on what makes each of the characters cool, rather than the potential detriments that would come with them not being human. Of course, that doesn't stop the creators from using their non-human attributes for things a bit more traditionally harem anime. I've already mentioned Pappy's small childlike proportions, but at least that's given an anatomical explanation. Things like Rachni being into bondage because she can spin webs, Centauria insisting on a master-servant relationship because she was raised in a society based around chivalry, or Mero being obsessed with being involved in a tragic romance because of Little Mermaid references. That is pushing it a little bit. It's a weird mishmash of traditional harem tropes and genuinely interesting world-building details, or just plain doing what you wouldn't expect with a harem show. For example, our main character, Kimihito. He is your prototypical harem protagonist. He's about as interesting as a wall covered in wet paint, he has very little personality to speak of other than being a generic nice guy, he has absolutely no ability to actually put his foot down or speak up when the situation calls for it, and cannot, for the life of him, commit in a satisfactory fashion to any of the women living with him one way or the other. And yet, the anime goes out of its way to justify this by the fact that any one of these women in his harem could very easily kill him accidentally. Hell, the very first scene of the first episode is Mia in a half-asleep state, almost accidentally crushing him to death. And she wasn't even trying to force herself on him that time, she just wanted to be warm. And that goes for all of the women as well. Even Mero, who in the anime is probably the most stable and sane out of the entire harem, probably wouldn't even bat an eye if he were to, say, drown himself because of her obsession with tragedies. So Kimihito's reluctance to actually commit and get close to the girls makes sense since he likes living and everything. And then there's the whole go to jail thing if he boinks one of them, though about halfway through the anime that's discarded in favor of attempting to force him to choose one of the girls to marry. Despite all this level of detail, there are a lot of things disappointing about this setup, the chief one being how it often glosses over the difficulties that most monsters would have if they tried to integrate into human society. At the start of the series, they do pay lip service to how successful the program is, despite being rushed out and apparently incredibly flawed, to the point where it's illegal for a human to attack a monster and vice versa, even in self-defense. And the success is shown off with an idol group made entirely out of non-human female singers. But the thing about that is, the monsters that find the most success in the human world are ones that look very close to being human, just with normal animal ears and a tail. More monstrous-looking creatures like Rachni, Mia, and even Mero find it more difficult to get acceptance because of how, well, monstrous they look, and in some cases act. This is, unfortunately, not touched on that much. Rachni's story and introduction is about as deep as it gets, but the series never really capitalizes on the potential storytelling tool very much. And then there's the comedy, which is actually pretty good most of the time. The series isn't comedy gold, I'll admit, but it at least gets me to smile more often than not, even if it does reach for that low-hanging fruit as often as it can. The series delights in putting the harem members in embarrassing, compromising positions, usually at Kimihito's expense. In fact, that's basically the setup to most of the comedy. Nudity happens, or Kimihito ends up getting hurt. But there is a rather uncomfortable part of the series' humor that I feel the need to address, and I apologize for editorializing a bit here. I am by no means a prude, and most of the time I don't mind fan service in large quantities, provided that there's at least some attempt at substance beyond that. But one of the biggest flaws with Monster Musume, and most modern ecchi comedies in general nowadays, is the way that they treat their sex jokes with a level of double standards that can actually make it relatively uncomfortable. It's how sexual assaults are handled. Now, most Japanese find sex and the lack of boundaries hilarious, and in certain contexts, yes, it can be hilarious. But in many shows, Mon Musu among them, there's not a lot of consistency about it. For example, one of the early episodes of the series features a story where Kimihito is trapped in his home with Mia, Poppy, and Centauria during the full moon, which apparently makes most female monsters go crazy with lust. Now, the entire situation is framed for comedy, like a parody of a horror movie of him running throughout the house trying to avoid three women who are so horny they can't think straight and who are fighting one another for the right to mate with him. Sounds funny, right? Until you realize that what they're trying to do is rape him. And as is pointed out in the episode itself, they'd most likely kill him while doing the deed in this state of mind. Death by snoo indeed. And then there are the numerous times throughout the show when one of the girls will accidentally get wet in some way, and Sue, being a slime girl, likes to suck moisture off of things no matter what it is or where it is, and then... Again, every time it happens, it's totally played for comedy, and it isn't like Sue doesn't know what she's doing either. She's aware and intelligent enough to know what she's doing. Both of these situations are used to try and elicit mirth from the audience, even though the situations themselves can easily be called rather uncomfortable. But during a later episode, Centauria is accosted and restrained by a group of human thugs who make it very clear that they are going to sexually assault and molest her, and she can't fight back due to the laws concerning attacking humans. This situation is not done for laughs. It's shown as something gross, abhorrent, and terrible. Of course, Centauria gets saved before anything can be done with her, but you see what I'm getting at here, right? When it's female on male or female on female, haha, comedy, rollicking good time. When it's male on female, and the male in question is an unlikable thug, totally not okay, totally not funny, totally played for drama. I'm not saying that ridiculous sex situations can't be funny, but it's difficult to do without seeming juvenile or cruel, and this instance, while it does seem pretty juvenile, it also adheres heavily to a massive double standard. Sexual violence against a man is funny, sexual molestation from one woman against another is funny, but male-on-female sexual assault isn't. It's a confused message, and that one moment in the show manages to paint the rest of the sexual humor in it as much more negative, even when it's portrayed as humorous. Anyway, soapboxing is over, let's move on. Remember when I said the characters have more than one dimension to them? Yeah, that was a bit of a half-lie. Like I said, Kimihito is the audience surrogate, and as such, he doesn't have much personality or development, he's just the generic nice guy. But the fact that he's also the straight man and the comic relief in the series also suggests that he doesn't need to have much development, even when he's the main character and primary love interest of every female monster that crosses his path. The girls that show up early on, primarily Mia, Poppy, Centauria, and Sue, are the ones that end up getting the most development throughout the series, with several episodes dedicated to exploring them and their problems and relationships. Rachni's development is mostly down to her introduction episode, and everything else that's important about her is basically expounded upon in the manga, but not here in the anime. Poor Mero gets absolutely no development. In fact, during the entirety of the anime, I'm pretty sure she doesn't even get a single storyline to herself. And Lala, well, she's in an even worse situation, being introduced in the final episode and basically only serving as a cameo appearance before the show ends. Then again, given its slice-of-life harem comedy, maybe I'm being too critical of the lack of character development, but given the setup of the world and the care gone into the creation of the characters and their anatomies, maybe I was just expecting character development to follow suit. Though it is tough to do any heavy development when you have a cast as large as this and only 12 episodes to do it in. It should also be noted that while the animation isn't terribly fluid, this is a slice-of-life harem show after all. It does still look relatively nice, and the series does manage to pull off the odd action scene now and then relatively well. I mean, it's a series full of monster girls. They weren't going to waste an opportunity for a little bit of action now and then. The rest of it, though, well, it's about what I'd expect from a show of the genre. The character designs, on the other hand, I absolutely love. While the flat-out human characters are pretty tame in terms of anime standards, and the merging of human and monster aesthetics actually looks really nice on most of them. I'm especially fond of Mero and Rachni's designs, though I also find Rachni's usual costume to be just freaking ridiculous. Excuse me, madam, but how do your boobs get any support from something that is literally just covering them from above? Stupid wardrobe choices aside, their designs are appealing, almost like they stepped right out of that weird Monster Girls encyclopedia site that I totally haven't spent any time browsing. No sir, not at all. In terms of the music, yeah, that's another really low point for the series. None of the background music stands out at all, good or bad, and while the sound design is nice, and the voice acting is appealing, even when I'm not familiar with the nuances of Japanese voice acting, and the various verbal tics that many of the girls have are rather adorable, well, you're not going to be putting this on your iPod, let's go with that. The big exception to the not memorable music, however, is, of course, the first opening theme song, which hits all the necessary tics to be a massive earworm when it comes to pop music. It's repetitive, it's got a peppy, upbeat sound with cute singers, most of whom are the actual voice actresses for the girls, and it lets you know exactly what show you're in for with a mix of silly lyrics and appealing visuals. At this point in time, if you're the sort of person who would enjoy the show, you've probably already seen it, and if you haven't, well, from the visuals I've been showing you and the descriptions I've been giving, it's pretty easy to see if this is the sort of show that would appeal to you. But if you find yourself watching harem shows on and off here and there, I'd recommend this one. Yes, while it does lean heavily on the tired tropes of its ilk, it does at least take an extra step in attempting to justify those tropes while at the same time adding in more details that I wouldn't have expected for what it is. The series is a relatively comfortable sit too, only being 12 episodes in a single standalone OVA, and while there's really not much of a feeling of finality to it, it's fine for the episodic romp that it is. It's basically a straight adaptation of the first 24 chapters of the manga, which is still ongoing, so if the series keeps your interest, it might be worth checking that out, though it is worth noting that the manga is far more explicit than the anime is, so just keep that in mind if you're getting a bit more adventurous. As for the anime itself, it is available at this time for streaming on Crunchyroll, and Sentai Filmworks has apparently licensed the series for a full English dub, coming sometime soon in the future, so there's that to look forward to as well. So yeah, I can't really believe I'm saying this out loud, but I recommend this show. I will wholeheartedly admit the series has problems, and its appeal is probably quite niche, though the New York Times best-selling manga list often proves me wrong in that regard. But I think what it does right makes it worth a watch. Just keep in mind that it's very much a product of its genre, and that the original author also has a reputation as a Pixiv artist who drew hentai joujinshi before publishing this manga, and you'll be fine. Whew, glad I got that out of my system. Hope you enjoyed the review, and I promise the next one won't be focused on something nearly as raunchy. We're moving from sex to violence, baby. Let's go!